Well, good morning once again. Hey, we're going to be in Psalm 139. We've been in a series going through the Psalms over the summer called Summer Playlist. We're going to be back in that today. And what we've been doing is hitting some foundational questions that everybody asks. I mean, there's some universal things that everyone ultimately is going to be confronted with or asked. One of those that we answered was, where do you find happiness, and can you find happiness? We talked about the question of where can you find your identity. We asked the question, where does meaning and how is it found? And the reality is there's just a lot of questions that we're confronted with in life. And so fortunately, we live in an age where typically if you've got a question, you can pretty easily find some kind of answer for it. I mean, whether or not it's just getting your laptop out and hitting Google, or maybe you get one of these things. I don't know if anybody knows what this is. This is an Echo. I borrowed this. It turned on. When you say its name, it actually turns on. But this is one of those type of things you can put in your house and you can ask questions of. And so let's just see if it works real quick since I've already turned it on. Echo, what was the Cubs score last night? Echo, what was the Cubs score last night?
Yesterday, the Cubs beat the Dodgers 2-1.
Yes, they did. They did. They beat the Dodgers. But more importantly, Echo. What was the Cardinals score last night?
On Sunday, December 30th, the Cardinals lost to the Seahawks 27-24 at CenturyLink Field in Seattle.
I don't know if that's the right Cardinals. I don't know if that's true. Sometimes they get them right and sometimes they get them wrong, right? The St. Louis Cardinals did lose last night, just for the record. But here's the deal. Is like you have one of these things in your house and you can ask questions. You can get on Google. You can ask Siri if you're an iPhone person or something like that. Typically, if you want to know how to fix a car, if you want to know how to plant a garden, whatever the thing is, then you can pretty much find the answers out there through modern media and technology. But the reality is that there's some questions that are deeper questions, right? There's some things that when you can learn facts, there's some things that facts don't answer. There's some things that are deeper than knowing. And there's something intrinsic to all of us, I would say, is that we want to know things. But I would say something that's even deeper than that is we want to be known. Wouldn't you say that to be true? I mean, think about why we enter into relationships. It's not just that we can know someone. It's almost that we really long to be known by someone. We long to have a relationship where it's an open, honest transfer of communication and emotion and all those type of things, but there's a tension with it. It's almost a paradox of sorts. As much as we want to know things and as much as we want people to know us, there's also an intrinsic fear that we don't want to be known too well. I mean, think about some of the closest relationships you have and think about some of the thoughts that you've thought and some of the feelings that you felt. Even in our closest relationships, there are times when we don't know if we truly want people to know what we think or how we feel about things. There's something about us, even with God, where it's one thing to know that God knows, and it's another thing to really want Him to know. You see, the Christian faith is all about answering the question of just not that how you could know facts about God, but how God can actually really know you and the power that that can bring in your life, that it actually is a powerful thing when we become transparent and God actually begins to truly know us. But there's that fear. It's the same fear that you have of why some of you don't have one of these in your house. Is because you don't know that you want this thing to pick up everything you say and do. And we're the same way with God, are we? Are we not? We want a God we can ask questions of, but we're not so sure we want a God that knows everything we say or everything we think. Psalm 139 is poetry. It's kind of the musings of a man that's familiar in history, King David. And he's writing about some truths. He's writing about what it means that God knows us and how we can know God. And so if you've ever wrestled with the question of what it means to know God and what it means that God could know you, then today we're going to look at some of those answers. And typically what we do around here is we pick a passage of Scripture and we go line by line, word by word. We break it down. Today's a little different because the Psalms are typically a little bit different. We're going to go through it in the same pace, but Psalms they're not very linear oftentimes, and Psalm 139 is not really a linear psalm. It hits some ideas and then it circles back around to them, and it hits it from a lot of different angles. So we're going to walk through it, but I'm going to provide a grid today, a little different than what we normally do, to kind of give us the rails to run on. And we're going to talk about three things. The first thing you're going to see is that in this psalm there are some truths to believe. There's some things that really ground us in our faith and what we believe to be true about God. But then with that truth, there are some tensions to actually embrace. And this is the hard part. The hard part is drawing the correlation between what is true about God and then really making it connect to your real life and my real life and what we actually see, feel, and experience. And so we're going to embrace some tension today. And then ultimately, we're going to take those truths and those tensions, and then we're going to apply a test by the end of it, and we're going to activate a test. And this is going to lead us to one question that Echo can't answer and one that Siri can't answer. It's one that only God can answer. And I would say a bold statement on the outset is the question we're going to ask at the end of the psalm that David asked can be the most life-transforming and profound question that you'll ever ask. It has the potential and power in your life today to actually make such a revolutionary change in your relationship with God that it could actually spill over into all the areas in your life. And so as we walk through the truths and the tensions, we're going to land on that question, which is a test for us to ask God to do something in us. But let's get the ball rolling. We got a lot of ground to cover. So Psalm 139 verse 1 says this: "You've searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways." He would go on to say this in verse 4. "Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain." What the psalmist David starts out with is something about the attributes of God. Now, when we talk about the attributes, we're just talking about things that can be attributed to God, His character, His existence, His personhood, who He is. If you ask someone to describe you would say, here's some characteristics. So when we talk about attributes, that's really all we're talking about, is how would you describe God? What are some truisms? What are some things, some truths that we need to believe about God? And he hits a lot of the foundational ones on here. These are usually categorized in two different ways. You could call them communicable attributes. That means that there are some things about God that are kind of like you. And the reason for that is you were created as an image. That's what we talked about last week. There are some things that are true about His character, that are true about His creation. So like the fact that you can love traces its way upstream to say, okay, well, but it's because God is love, the New Testament would tell us. And so because He is love, His creation, people that bear His image, we're loved. Those are communicable type attributes. There's some things that are similar and can be communicated between two people, God and His creation. But there are also some things called incommunicable attributes. They're things that are not true of us, but are only true about God. There's some things that when you look at Him, you're just like, oh no, that's all God, that's none of me. I am not like that. And he points those out in this outset. And typically we would group these by some really big words. They would be like the fact that God is omniscient. That means that God knows everything. The fact that God is omnipresent. That means that He's everywhere. And the fact that He's also, what did I say, omnipotent? Is that all? Did I say omnipotent? Omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. You got it, right? These are the type of things like, I'm not all-powerful, and you're not either. I don't know everything, and you don't either, right? Even though you want to act like you do, and I want to act like I do sometimes. We can't be everywhere at all times. But the way that the psalmist David describes God are some things that he says, these are truths that we have to believe, and if God is God, these are things that have to be true about Him. One of them deals with the fact that He sees everything, right? You see my getting up and my lying down. You see my going out and my coming back. He talks about the fact that you're not limited, God, the fact that you're unrestrained. He also talks about the fact that before a word is on my tongue, you knew it. And so this thing about God, this incommunicable attribute about God is the fact that not only is He unrestrained in the fact that He can see every person, He can see every person of all time. I mean, he's not limited just to be able to see the 7.5 billion people or so on the planet and know what's going on with you and not know what's going on with me. He also can see all the people that have gone before us and all the people that will come after us. The words that you're going to speak tomorrow that haven't even crossed your brain yet, God says, the word says that God actually knows what you're going to say this week. Now, wouldn't it be great if you knew that? If you knew what was going to get you in trouble this week? This is the truth about God. He hems us in from behind and before. He lays His hand upon us. This knowledge of this, Scripture would say, is too wonderful for me. David would say, it's too lofty for me to attain. Now, that's kind of flowery language. The New English translation says it a lot more succinctly and plainly. What does that mean? Your knowledge is beyond my comprehension. It is so far beyond me, I am unable to fathom it. Now, this is true about God, right? These are hard concepts for us to get. The eternality of God. There's probably no more difficult thing for the mind to grasp than eternity or time or existing outside of time. I mean, if you watch any common movie out there, Back to the Future, Back to the Future 2, Back to the Future 3, moving through time is pretty confusing, right? It lends itself to problems. And so for us to comprehend what God is like is really difficult for us. But what we have to understand is foundational about God is we have to understand that He is omnipresent, He's omniscient, and He's omnipotent. He is God that extends outside of the realm. He is unrestrained. That means that He doesn't have anything to learn and He can't forget anything. He exists outside the bounds of what we are bound by. Now, it's hard for us to understand. So I got a little illustration for us. This is a picture of our family, okay? There they are. And this past winter, we got the family together, and we got everybody dressed up, or as dressed up as we get at the Reeves house. And we got a friend to come over, take some pictures, and we got the picture printed out. When we got the picture printed out, we put it in a frame, and this typically sits, I grabbed it on the way out today, it sits on in our foyer, and it's just a photo of our family. But what you would see from this is something you walk by it, you wouldn't think about it, but it's true. It is a true representation to some degree of our family. There are real images of real people on there, but when you look at it, it's just two-dimensional, right? It's flat. There's height and width to it, but there's no real depth to it. There's no movement in it. It basically reflects like a one split second, one moment in time. So when we took that snapshot, what we did is we kind of wrapped in time and solidified in time one singular moment. And then what do? We went and got a frame. We put it in a frame and we set it on a table in our foyer. This picture, with all it is, the dimensions that it contains, the information that it has, is contained inside the frame. But here's the reality. I am standing outside the frame right now, and so are you. Right now, you're moving around, you're thinking thoughts, you're doing things. I'm doing the same thing. I'm talking. This exists here, but we all exist outside of it, and it's not confusing to us to think that way. That's just normal, everyday thing. There's lots of pictures, there's lots of things out there. And a lot of times it's hard for us to grasp about God, the eternality of God, or these incommunicable attributes about God, but really it's as simple as a picture on your table. We exist outside the frame in much the same way that God exists outside the frame. What is the frame for us? The frame is the constructs of time, the constructs of the planet that we've been given. These are the things that God has created for us, and He stands outside of those things. That's why they don't apply to Him. He created it, and He can operate in it and engage with it, but He exists outside of it. So the eternality of God is less about the fact that on a linear scale that He doesn't know a beginning and an end. It's that He actually can't know a beginning and an end, because He stands outside of something He created, a frame, which is time. So what you have in Psalm 139 is an ancient way of dealing with a tension that we all experience. It's that there is this God, and He exists, and we can't understand Him. We can't fathom Him. This knowledge is beyond our actual comprehension, and that can foul us up. It can trip us up because we would think because we can't understand it, then He must not be there. But that is not the conclusion that the psalmist David reaches. He reaches the conclusion that this knowledge about God is actually a good thing. The fact that he is outside our comprehension and outside the constructs and the frame of our world is actually a good thing. But the good thing presents itself as a tension. Remember, we're going to talk about truths to believe, but we're also going to talk about tensions to embrace. The tension is that when we would say, yeah, hey, I believe that God does that. God, if he's there, he has to exist that way. But what we would also do is we would, in the tension, fight against that reality. And this is the tension we all face, is it not? We would say, in a place like this, because we're church and we can say these things, is like, yeah, we believe that God is all-powerful, and he's all-knowing, and he's everywhere at all times. He's not bound by time, space, anything like that. But your day-to-day experience, and mine as well, is a tension between that truth and our lives. And that's the tension that the writer David isolates and wrestles with in verse 7. This is what he says. And see if this is not true of you. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? He asks a question, and you've experienced this. When in one breath you would say, yeah, I believe that to be true about God, you would also probably be willing to admit at some point in your life, if not right now currently, that you oftentimes flee from his presence. I mean, this is what we all do. We'll come to a church service, and we'll talk about the greatness of God, sing about it, cry tears about it if you're me, those kind of things, and pray about it, and then we'll go back out, and then will be areas of our lives where we try to run away from the Spirit of God in our life, his power in our life, his knowledge and his wisdom in our life. We would say it in one breath and resist it in the other, and this is intrinsic to us. This happened beginning in Genesis chapter 3. When Adam and Eve sinned against God, what did they do? They ran away from God. It's kind of like playing hide and seek with your 2-year-old. It's not a very smart proposition. If you're the 2-year-old, you're going to be right. I can see you. You're right in front of me. And they're like, I'm hiding. Yeah, I can totally see your feet underneath the curtain. Right? This is what we're like. We believe in falsely believe that we can run away from the presence of God. We can say it and know it's not true, but we all repel and all run away from it. And David experienced this. There were areas of his life where he ran from the presence of God. Follow his story. He was not a perfect man. He was actually a very evil man at different times in his life. He was a man who committed adultery, who concocted a conspiracy for murder. The decisions where he did not allow God's presence to inform his decisions, and he followed him in faith, that began to have destructive and disastrous results in his personal life, in his family, in the nation. People were killed over his mistakes. Why was that? Is because there are areas that we all have in our life where we would run away and flee from the presence of God, knowing that if it's true that he's God, we can't do it. This wording is actually the same wording if you've read the book of Jonah, the prophet Jonah. He was fleeing from God. He fled away from God's calling in his life, thinking falsely that he could get away from God's hand in his life. The psalmist David would say, we know this to be true, but the tension is this. We all knowingly would admit that God has to be powerful like that if he exists, but we would also say, most of us, if not all of us, at some point in our life, we buck against it and we try to flee his presence. But the reality, the tension that you have to embrace is you can't get away. Verse 8, that's what he said, right? If I go up to the heavens, you're there. If I make my bed in the depths, some of your translations would say Sheol, which is in the depths of hell kind of thing. You're there. If I rise on the wings of dawn, that's in the east. And I would settle on the far side of the sea. That would have been west for them. So basically, up and down, left and right. I can't get away from the presence of God. No matter where I go, he would say in verse 10. Verse 10, he would say, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light will become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. You are just different than us, God. I can't run away. I can't get up and get away from you. I can't go down and get away from you. I can't go to the left or to the right. I can't be so dark that I can hide from you. See, this is the tension. And this is the reality. And so what is David doing? He's doing what you do kind of like in a journal entry. Is you're saying what's true, but you're saying in honesty, this is what I'm wrestling with. And these are what the Psalms are. They describe for us the tension that's in all of us. And so the first one is simply that, is that God's everywhere, but we flee from it. The second one, the second truth, is that God is our creator and he created with purpose and design. And most of us would know this one. You've probably seen it on a painting somewhere or something like that. Verse 13 is kind of the famous section of Psalm 139. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. What is he saying? He says the next truth is this, is that God created our inmost being. What is that? That means that your soul, you, who you really are. And I'm not talking about your body or anything like that. I'm talking about the you that is really you, the spirit, the thing that exists forever in one destination or the other. God created that. The fact that God created that, like we talked about last week, means that every single person that is created has inherent dignity and worth because they bear the image of the Creator. They were designed. You were created by God. And so what does he say? I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Matter of fact, if you were going to read that just kind of strict translation from the Hebrew, Psalm 139:14, it would actually say, for I am fearfully wonderful. The translators put these other words to help us to kind of understand it because it doesn't sound very good. It doesn't sound very Christian-like to say, I am wonderful, right? But God's intent was to leave an indelible mark on his creation, that you are wonderfully made, and I am too. Not restricted to a color, not restricted to an age or an ethnicity or a gender. God says that every single person is fearfully wonderful. It was purposeful. And so David, now he moves on to the next truth and he says, God, you created me. You created my spirit. It's who I really am. But you didn't just stop on the inside. You created the outside. Verse 15, remember this is what he says, my frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place. When I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body. And then he says, all the days were ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. He hits on two truths, even though I only highlighted one. The first one that we talked about just a second ago was he created our spirit and our soul. The second one, he created our body. That means that there's no mistakes here, even though sometimes I look in the mirror and think somebody made one, right? He made our body, made our frame. We live in a tangible universe. That's why worship is tangible. That's why your work matters. That's why what you do matters. God gave you a body to work and worship with. To operate inside of physical creation. So he created you as a physical being. But on top of that, he says, not only did I create your spirit and your body, I also ordained the days of your life. That means that every day matters. Some of you just need to hear that because you're going through a time where you're like, man, a season in your life where it seems like nothing matters. But here's the thing, is that if this is true, if this is something that we believe to be true about God, it's true for today, that what you do today matters. And the person you're becoming today matters. Why? Because this is who God created you to be. His spirit with the body in action in real time inside the frame. All this stuff is purposeful. But it's not just purposeful, he'd say. It's also precious. This is his word, not mine. I probably wouldn't have chosen that word, but this is David. He's a Renaissance man. He says, how precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of the sand. When I awake, I am still with you. I cannot get away from your sight, from your gaze. But it's more than you just watch from afar. It's more than you just wound the clock and watch it tick. You actually have thoughts about me. You actually care about me. That means that if no one else seems to care about you in your life, God cares about you. God knows what's going on in your mind, and knowing that he cares for you in much the same way that you would care for your child. Actually, a greater extent. I mean, he loves you in such a way. He loves me in such a way. This is who he is. This is the way he thinks about you. Matter of fact, this is rooted in the belief about God. But even with this belief about God, there's a tension with that, because here's the application. If that's true of you, then that has to be true of other people, right? It's not just true for you. It's not just true for your ethnicity. It's not just true for your gender. It's not just true for people that live in your neighborhood and your socioeconomic class or work and have the education you have. This is true for everyone. And so David, writing in this, he moves from this truth and then he moves straight to the tension and he gets really honest with God. And this is what he says. It seems like somebody that's on a whole different polarity. If only you, God, would slay the wicked. Where did that come from? Where did this thing come in your mind, David, to say this? You were just talking about how great God is and that God's everywhere. This is coming from a really honest place from David. Away from me, you who are bloodthirsty. They speak of you who with evil intent, your adversaries misuse your name. Do I not hate those who hate you, Lord, and abhor those who are in rebellion against you? I have nothing but hatred for them. I count them my enemies. This is honesty. This is the tension. That while we can fully embrace and believe that God loves us that way, and this is the Christian hallmark of the day, it seems, that we believe that we have some kind of special thing with God, that God loves us more than He loves other people. But what Scripture would say is that He loves everyone. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. Isn't it Jesus who said in Matthew chapter 5, you've heard it said that you should hate your enemies, but I tell you this, that you should love your enemies and pray for those that persecute you. Didn't James' brother say, you have this thing, this tension with your mouths where you would give praise to God and then you would curse other people? It should not be so. You see, what Paul picked up on is a reality is that we have misplaced hatred and we have misplaced enemies. We think that others are enemies, and in our honesty, if we would be honest, it is so. There are people we struggle to like. There are, in fact, oftentimes people we hate. The tension is we can believe God loves us, created us with purpose, and turn around to another person that He created equally in the same way, and look at them with loathing and hatred when God looks at them with love. The truth that Paul picked up on in Ephesians 6, he says, you have to realize that we don't war against flesh and blood. We struggle against powers and principalities and spiritual wickedness in high places. We don't fight against people, we fight for people. And so what you have in Psalm 139 is the raw honesty that God wants from all of us. The transparency that this is not a prescription to allow you to say, see, David hated people. There are people that we are supposed to hate. This is not prescription, this is description. This is describing what is true. This is wrestling with the belief and then saying, I'm going to embrace the tension that it has not been fully realized in my spirit, in my life, in my mind, in my soul. So what do you do with that? You have truths to believe. You have tensions to embrace. But then there's a test to activate and apply, and that's where he lands. He actually does something interesting that they would do oftentimes. They do it in other forms of literature as well, but Hebrew literature, they would do this frequently. They would repeat something. They would bookend something. And so the beginning and the end would have a similar thing to draw you to a different conclusion. And that's what he does. Here's what he says. See if it sounds familiar. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. Anything sound familiar? Search me, God, and know my heart. How did he begin the psalm? Psalm 139:1. You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. So what's happening here? Is he just repeating himself? Has he not just spent the whole psalm basically telling us it's true and you can't get away from it? You see everything, you know everything, you hear everything, you know everything about me, inside out, when I get up and I lie down, there's nothing I can do to get away from your presence. This is different, though. Because in Psalm 139:1, he says, you have searched me and you know me, but now he's inviting God to search him. You see, there's a difference in knowing that God sees me and asking God to search me. It's different. That's why I think in church it's easy for us to attest to things, to believe about God, but then when it actually comes to activating them personally, we never make the step from our head to our heart. It's one thing to agree the fact that God sees, knows, hears everything, and it's another one to say, God, I want you to see me with purpose, to open up to actually hear from God on a personal level. I think this is David in raw honesty once again saying, there's some things going on that I can't comprehend. There's some things, feelings going on and thoughts going on in me. I don't know that they're right. I'm trying to figure out how to live in the reality of a belief in you. And is this not the honesty that the church today needs to embrace? This is not an easy believism. This is not a moral religion alone. This is wrestling with the incomprehensible God through what He's revealed about Himself and about us. And so what do we say? We say what David said. Search me, God. Search me, God, and know my heart. Not just out there where I can't touch you and see you and feel you, but I want you to come in and I want you to do surgery on me. And what I want you to do, I want you to test me. Now, test insinuates that there is a truth, a standard that we are being evaluated on. Okay? None of us would want to go take a test, an exam, an entrance exam, or something for your job, or try to graduate your final exam, and there not be an objective thing. You don't want it to be completely subjective. That's really hard to see how you measure up. God has created objective things that He would say, these are true. These are true about me. These are true about creation. These are true about you. But I don't always know those things, and you don't either. So we come with a posture of humility. This is a humble question. God, will you search me? And will you test me? This is admitting the fact that I might not measure up to the standard. If you haven't been around here very long, we always teach around here that there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none that seeks after God on their own. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And so we would say that, but we also have to invite that in. God, would you test me? Will you take my attention off of others? And will you not direct your gaze with a laser focus, that big broad spectrum gaze of yours, will you with a laser focus, will you look at my heart and see what's inside of me, because I don't know that I know what's in there. And would you help me to know my anxious thoughts? What are anxious thoughts? They're fears. What was David feeling? He was feeling fearful. He was being attacked. People hated him. They were threatening him physically, threatening his position, his power, his very life physically. But not only that, they were attacking his faith. They didn't believe his God. The Babylonians didn't believe his God. The Assyrians didn't believe his God. The Persians wouldn't believe his God. Later, the Greeks and the Romans wouldn't believe in that God. There's always been people that don't believe what we believe, and God's people have always wrestled with how do we react? How do we react to those people? And we're fearful. But we're not only fearful about those type of things, there's a lot of little things. And the thing about fear is, anxiousness and fear is, what we fear the most reveals where we trust God the least. The things that we're most fearful of. If you're a fearful person, and some of us are just prone more to it, some of us are more kind of like happy-go-lucky, and some of us are a little bit more serious and melancholy, and some of this is personality, but some of us it's a deep spiritual issue where Satan gets a foothold and he really gets into our fear. And when we get really fearful about things, it reveals some things. It reveals where we really struggle to trust God. Some of you are really worried and fearful in your marriage or your finances. I get fearful about what you'll think about me and how well I'll do. I fear things and you fear things, but those are typically the place where it actually is revealing some things about where I'm struggling to actually trust God, where I'm having trouble trusting God. And so what does David say? He says, hey, will you search me with a laser focus? Will you test me? And will you know my anxious thoughts? Because I don't even know what's happening here. I don't even know why I feel this way. I just seem to feel like this. I'm fearful. I'm worried. I'm anxious. God, will you come in and will you help me to know what it is and see what's right and wrong? But it's not just things you're worried about and fearful about. It's actually things that might be offensive about you. He goes on to say, see if there's any offensive way in me. Now, here's the thing. All of us think we're better than we are. Most of us try to believe the best about ourselves, but we have struggled to believe the best about others. But typically, you can figure out where the offensive way is in yourself. It's not a fun process, obviously, but you could typically find it. You can actually see where you're most offensive by seeing where you're most defensive. Isn't that true? Think about it. Someone confronts you about an issue in your character. Your typical response is to stiff-arm them, right? No, you're wrong. People say you're arrogant. No, I'm not. People say, well, that was inappropriate. No, it's not. You have no right to judge me. You don't know me. Judge not lest you be judged. You know, we throw all that stuff around. Why is that? Because typically the places where we're the most offensive are the place that it hurts the most, so that it's hard to go. And what I find about my own faith and see in others is when you first come to Christ, you really try to deal with the big things, and it makes sense. Like, I mean, if you're in a bad, destructive habit, whether it be like drinking a lot, or maybe you're sleeping around, or whatever, you try to come to God, you say, I'm going to take it away, I'm going to go over here, and you should move away from those things. But what you find when you move the big things away, the big demonstrative, visible things, there's some other really big things behind those things that you did not see. There are things driving all the other stuff. So maybe the insecurity that you're not trusting God in is driving you to be promiscuous. Maybe the fact that you are worried is driving you to drink. I mean, there's some things behind the things that are driving the things, right? And oftentimes the places where we're hard, are really difficult to see, are the places where we're most offensive, that we have to actually invite God in to see. So what is he saying? He's saying if you're stiff-arming God, what would happen if you dropped your arm? What if the place that you're most offensive right now is exactly the place that God wants to go to deliver you from the thing that's most offensive about you? Because what did he say? Search me, O God. Know my heart. Test me. Know my anxious thoughts. God, will you see if there's any offensive way in me? I can see it in all the other people, but I have a hard time looking in the mirror and seeing the offensive ways in myself. But if you're being really defensive about something, it might be the very thing, and in me it oftentimes is. I don't like hearing the place where I'm offending other people or I'm doing something wrong before God, but I've got to drop my arm. And how does that happen? Daily time in the Word, consistent time in prayer, time in open, honest community. The reason that many of you are not in the Word, you're not in prayer, and you're not in community is because you're confronted with yourself. And I am too. It makes it really hard to do those things. But why would God create for us a faith where he says, I want you to spend time with me on a regular basis, not to check a box, not to gain my approval, but because I want to confront things in you to deliver out things from you. I want you to be in community because you're confronted with yourself. You can't run away from you in those places. You get in those places and you're confronted with the offensive in you, the worry that you have. And a redemptive community comes around you and invests in you and encourages you and challenges you and all those type of things. That's what church is supposed to be. It's not the place we want to run to. We're defensive against it. Ultimately, all those things are redemptive in nature because they lead us to the way that's everlasting. The last request he makes says, lead me in the way everlasting. He uses this terminology that I think is kind of cool because he says, see if there's any offensive way in me and lead me in a different way. Lead me in a different way. This is like saying simply this is, I don't want to stay right here. Have you ever been there? I don't want to stay like this. I don't want to be like this. I don't want the next 20 years to look like this. I don't want to be the same person that I am right now. I want to change. I don't want to be fearful. I want to be closer to God. I want to serve more, give more, help more. I want to be more loving. I want to do those things. You can't do those things on your own, but you can be led there. And he says, only through saying the biggest question that you could ever ask God, God, will you search me? This takes it from philosophy and theology and it makes it personal. God, will you search me? Have you ever asked God to search you? I'm not asking you to believe that he's omnipresent and all-powerful and those things. I'm saying, have you ever truly asked that God to look at you, knowing he already sees? And he didn't leave. Matter of fact, the offensive way in you and the way before you, the everlasting way, there is a way to that. And Jesus himself defined it. He says, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. There's no one that can get to God except through me. So if you're looking for the way to the everlasting and out of the offensive way that's in you, there is one way. and it's Jesus. It's always Jesus. He's not the one that just opens the door. He's the one that actually is the road we run on every single time we go back to the gospel. Why? Because we know there are offensive ways in us, there are worries and fears in us, and we need him to lead us in a way. So we're going to end today by simply asking you to do that along with me. I'm going to ask if you'd bow your head and close your eyes for just a second. It's just a posture of prayer. There's nothing super spiritual about that. It's just a way for you to concentrate and to weed out some distractions. That's all it is. It's a way for you to kind of think for a second. And I'm just going to ask you to do one thing. I'm going to ask if you would say to God, not out loud, but between you and God, it might be the first time you've ever prayed or first time you prayed in a long time, but would you say to God, God, will you search me? Will you search me? And will you listen for God to reveal any offense in you, any fear in you? I promise if he reveals that he's trying to lead you out of it, he's already provided the way for it. Would you confess that to him right now? And would you tell him he has your heart and he has your life? Would you respond to him right now in that way? We're going to let you just sit and pray for a minute, and the band's going to begin singing in just a few minutes. You can join in with them. But right now, just sit in a posture of prayer and just talk to God.